Okay, good afternoon. It's my pleasure to present you the first results of our joint paper on the impact of hot and cold temperature days on the income inequality in Russia. This is a joint work with Vladimir Atrashenko, and we are both from the Leibniz Institute for East and Southeast European Studies in Regensburg. The outline of my talk is pretty standard, so I will introduce the topic and our motivation, why we actually decided to work on this. Then I will present you our mechanisms, how, why, basically, weather could affect income inequality, and then go through the methodology and our first results. Given the global warming, there are a lot of studies appearing now about the impact of climate change, global warming, weather shocks on various indicators. The first literature were looking on the primarily like Earth consequences or biological consequences, and the most recent literature actually looks a lot into the socioeconomic consequences. And even in one of the recent appearances of Guardian, there was an article about the heat as a potential danger for the income inequality in the world. And what the article basically is arguing that the world will be now divided into the countries that do have cold days and countries that do not have the hot days. And this may be one of the factors, decisive factors in determining the income inequality in the world. And a bit more to this topic, there are recent studies looking into the impact of hot temperatures on the economic growth. And when the researchers look into the country level, they basically argue that the poor countries become poorer despite of emitting less, despite of contributing less to the economy of the world. They are more suffering from the impact of global warming. And what is also argued that it's basically the effects, they are all concentrated. So if you look into this picture, we see that the closer countries to the equator than the poorer country, and the more it experiences of hot days and more inequality it suffers. But also according to this picture, the one may get the conclusion that Russia would be one of the most benefiting countries of the world, given the distribution of weather that Russia has, mostly into the colder temperatures than on average in the world. And we decided to look into this a bit more, whether it is indeed so, as the country-level analysis of the different researchers in the world argues that it's, if you look into the country level, then Russia won't be one of the benefiters and one of the winners of the global warming, and that it will be the effects would be strongly positive for Russia. We first look into the simple correlation about the number of hot days in the period starting from 1990 until now, and the average GDP per capita. And if you look into simple correlations, it shows that the correlation is also negative. So the number of hot days increasing, and with the increase of number of hot days, the GDP per capita is falling. So this picture on the national level data may basically bring you to some misleading results that it will be strongly positive effects. So what we do in this paper, we look into the impact of extreme temperatures, both extremely hot and extremely cold temperatures on economic growth and income distribution in Russia. By extreme temperatures, I mean extremely hot temperature would be the average daily temperature of 25 degrees. This will be like per 24 hours, the daily temperature. So any day is above than 25 will be considered as hot, and any day is -3 and below, -23 and below will be considered as extremely cold. We'll also look into more details into the channels why this happens, and this is one of our contributions to the literature, because so far the literature mostly identified the impact of hot temperatures on economic growth without really exploring the channels. And this is partly also due to the data availability, because most of the studies, they look into country levels only, and given the country level analysis, it's not always possible to identify specific channels. And we also conduct some heterogeneity analysis, looking into whether poor and rich regions would be affected differently, and whether hot and cold regions would be affected differently. Basically, if we talk briefly about the literature, there are a lot of literature focusing on impact of temperatures on mortality. And this is started with the epidemiological studies, but also in economics, there is a growing literature about that. There are studies that you look into the impact of hot temperatures and cold temperatures using regional level data from India, Mexico, United States. And we also contributed in this direction. Two of our papers are on mortality, and the very recent paper looks into the violence and the impact of hot temperatures on violence. And so the general conclusion of these studies is that the hot temperatures do increase mortality, and actually cold temperatures also do increase mortality. Regarding the economic growth and the income distribution, there are not that many studies. As I mentioned, there are a lot of them looking into mostly in the country level economic growth, and not into the impact, not into the economic inequalities, income inequalities. There are a couple of studies that look into the regional level income, but this is focused on the Americas only, and they do not look into the channels, do not explore the channels in details. Basically, weather may affect the income distribution. To start with, we should look into the epidemiological literature and say that there are comfortable limits for the human body that would be comfortable and that produce the well-functioning of the human body. So in winter, ambient temperature 20-23, in summer 22-25. What is beyond these borders in any way, it would cause the response of human body in terms of thermoregulation, and this will affect human health. And there are studies that show that this affects, worsens cognitive performance, it worsens work productivity, number of hours worked in industries that are more exposed to the temperature, for example, agriculture, and also leads to relocation of time from leisure to non-work. And this, as a result, may, in principle, affect income inequality through three main channels. One channel would be the labor market. It may affect wages, given that productivity is now lower, then it may be reflected in the wages. It may lead to relocation of labor from one industry to another, or from employment to unemployment. The second channel could be because of the different development of rich and poor regions. Some industries may be concentrated more in richer regions, some industries may be concentrated in poorer regions, and this may be even stronger diverging with the impact of temperatures. And one final channel that we could identify from the literature is through the changes in the energy and food prices. So the temperature may have the direct effects on the energy and food prices that would be affected reflected in the real incomes. Our econometric model is as follows. We look into the bunch of economic indicators. We start with the regional GDP per capita and the sum of the measures of the income inequality, and then look into more channels, into the variables that could reflect what are the, through which variables the effect on income inequality could go. These are unemployment, the wages in different sectors, and the employment in different sectors. What is also important is we identify these extremes. So the variables that I have for these beams are the beam, for example, below -23 would be calculating for each region and each year the number of days within a particular year with the average temperature below -23. So this will be number of days, and similarly for the beans above 25, so it would be the number of days above 25, and we also do this exercise for the precipitation. What is not shown, this interval minus 23 plus 25, this would be taken as a default. So when we interpret the results, this is basically interpretation of 1 day with temperature plus 25 would be affecting inequality in this way as compared to the temperature range minus 23, 25. We also control for the various fixed effects, regional fixed effects, time fixed effects, regional trends to capture the specific variations that could be affecting the model. Data that we use are from two major sources. One is the data on the weather indicators from the meteo stations of Russia. For 20 years, data aggregated from the meteorological station level to the regional level, and we use some population weighting to have the data on by the average person, average weather experienced by the average person in the region. And the second part of the data is coming from the Rosstat indicators on the GDP per capita, income group shares, poverty, monetary incomes, and so on. This is just to show how the data look like. So this would be the distribution of temperatures, different temperature ranges, the number of days with particular temperature, and this is average of over the large period of time. What is in black here we use as a default category, so we are specifically looking into the weather extremes, into extremely hot and into extremely cold days and how they are affecting. This is the first part of the result. So what we can see here that extremely hot days do decrease the GDP per capita, and extremely cold days do not have such effect. And this is the consistent result with what is previously found with the country level studies. Then we look into the different income groups, and there we find that the extremely hot days, they do increase the shares of lowest and middle income groups, but do not affect the high income groups. And if you look into the other indicators like poverty or the monetary income, there are no effects. But this is general picture that does not give much juice into the results, so we decided to look into more mechanisms why this is happening. So we first divided the countries into poor and rich according to the mean GDP per capita. So the countries above the mean would be richer countries, regions below the mean would be poorer regions. And if you look into the results by poor and rich regions, we could first see that this effect on the lower and middle income groups is basically driven by the poorer regions. And there are also some effects of precipitation on the middle income groups, and we do not much yet interpreted these results, but basically the considerable amount of precipitation also can increase the income shares of the middle groups. If we look into the same results for the richer regions, we first see that the higher income group decreases. So the one hot day decreases the share of the higher income group, and also decreases there are some effects of the colder temperatures on poverty, for example. If you look more into why this may happen, the first channel, the labor market channel, could be through unemployment. So if you look into the general picture on the unemployment, we see that the hot days, they do increase unemployment, and this is specifically mostly through the unemployment in poorer regions. You might think that this is a kind of small coefficient that is not very sizable economic terms, but you should remember this is the impact of only 1 day. So 1 day with the temperature above 25 increases unemployment by 0.2%, and if, for example, there will be 10 of such days, then unemployment will be increasing even more. And we also divided the regions into hot and cold. So the regions that experience hotter temperatures on average more frequently, and the regions that experience colder temperatures more frequently. And there we see that basically the negative effects of hot temperatures, they are mostly concentrated in hotter regions. And we also compared the poorer regions and hot regions, and actually in most of the cases, hot and poor region is basically the definition, the coinciding definition. Further, we look into other labor market channels that perhaps hot temperatures may affect the income distribution through the impact on wages. This was our hypothesis, but in fact we do not find evidence for this hypothesis. These different rows for different industries in Russia. It was not very nice to put it all into the picture, but basically the finding from this picture is that there is no statistically significant impact of neither cold nor hot days on the relative wages in Russia. Then we also look into the shares of employed in different industries, and we also see that, for example, hot days, they strongly negatively reduce the share of employed in manufacturing, and although marginally, but increase the share of employed in the public sector. And this is also an important conclusion because basically from the private sectors, the employment would go to more public sectors, and this would be influenced by the hot temperatures. If you look into the impacts of hot days also for the poor and hot regions, we see that in richer regions, the shares of employed in agriculture grows, the shares of employed in the public sector grows, and for the poor regions, we have some marginal effects on decreasing agriculture, but the effect is very statistically imprecise. Yeah, to conclude, our first findings say that the hot temperatures indeed affect the development of income distribution in Russia, and both the poor and rich regions are affected. Cold temperatures mostly do not have impact on the income distributions. And what are the channels through which it works? It's mostly through the increases in unemployment, and mostly in poor regions, and also due to relocation of labor from private to public sector. These would be the most significant channels that would affect, through which weather may affect the income distributions. And this is all from my side. Thank you very much.
So discussions for the paper? Yeah.
Thank you very much. First of all, let me confess that this climate change is not exactly my basic area of research, but I enjoyed reading this paper thoroughly, and I've learned a lot. And I would thank Ilya for literally motivating me to read and discuss this paper. Now, I would like to avoid what she has already said and presented in this paper, and come to some specific remarks which are almost on the slides where I have the results, and then some maybe general remarks. So I will not go into the contribution of the paper, which I think is very clear from her presentation, that she has given a detailed, in-depth analysis of the impact of extreme temperatures, and also the channels through which this change in temperature, hot and cold temperatures affect income distribution. Then she has given us all the channels. I'm sure all of us have understood it clearly. Methodology is basically standard fixed effect models, and she has data on 89 reasons for Russia and for 89 to 50. Now, I have some specific questions here, maybe. I have not been fully able to understand. Please excuse me for that. And maybe some of them are not very relevant, but still, for my clarification at least, and maybe for the House, perhaps they may be important. Like, for example, one thing is you have mentioned that the days, if you look at the number of days, I think I have mentioned somewhere here, the very hot days and the very cold days, the distribution of days shows that they are not very high, maybe almost 2% or 2.5%, very hot days and very cold days in terms of the total distribution. So I was wondering that how much does that affect the total overall inequality, looking at the very low number of days there. And the second is you have some regressions which is for extremely cold days, and you have shown that there is no impact on GDP per capita. And so can we have a similar regression for very hot days? I don't know whether you have done it and is it possible. So please enlighten me on this. Then I think your other results are both poor, rich regions are vulnerable to extreme temperatures, which I think goes well. And then what you have basically shown is that overall the results are that hot days, they concentrate in relatively hotter regions. And so why not in cold regions we have this kind of an impact? And that is another thing which I would like to know. And then perhaps you have also mentioned in terms of your theory that temperature extremes may lead to relocation of time from work to leisure and from work to unemployment. This reduces hours worked in specific sectors and reduces wages. Now, I have not been able to understand that why should wages reduce and not increase, especially if there is a relocation from work to leisure, then I think the supply of work would reduce. And if the demand remains same, either we are presuming that the demand for work is going down, but if the demand is same and if the supply of work is reducing, should it reduce wages? I don't know. And so I would perhaps need some clarification on this. That is my specific comment on this. Then you have summary of findings and important findings. Then quickly, one or two observations, and then I think I will stop. You have mentioned how global warming could increase agriculture profit in rich countries. Now, you have also cited page 4, some studies. So why should it be like this? I am not able to understand why should increase agriculture profit in rich countries, the global warming. And what could be the reason for increase in agricultural profit in rich countries? Then I think I've already asked you this second question. Hot days are only 2.5%, cold days are 2 to 3%. Can these 5% days significantly affect income inequalities? That is, I'm not saying they do not affect, but is it very significant, and should we at the moment be worried? Maybe in future, if we have many more days like this, it could be a problem. Then another thing is you have shown a negative correlation in figure A1. Now it seems that you have a concentration of your entire points in a particular region, and then there are 5, 6 outliers. Your this negative trend line is coming perhaps because of these outliers. So can we take it as a real negative trend? Because if you remove these outliers or treat them separately, maybe you don't get a kind of a declining trend line. You get either a straight line, maybe a vertical line. I don't know exactly. You can look at this. And then there's some, again, a kind of a contradiction for me. You have suggested in your conclusion that unemployment increases and relocation of labor from private to public sector are among the major forces that reduce economic growth and increases inequality. But at some other point, you have also mentioned that it is for better coping, we should move people from private sector to public sector. I think you have mentioned somewhere in your paper. So, yeah. So I don't know, you can go back to this and see whether, to me it is a contradiction that if on the one hand we are saying movement of labor from private to public will reduce kind of a suffering of this climate change, because maybe in public sector you have more stability of job and maybe the unemployment level will perhaps not be as high. There are coping mechanism in the public sector which may not be there in the private sector. So how can we advocate more of the private sector? And the last point is, perhaps I was looking for some impact of food and energy prices on GDP inequalities in terms of your regression analysis or somewhere, but I think I missed out on that. Thank you. These are my observations on the paper.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Yeah, please.
Thank you very much for this presentation. I have the following question. Why do you use that minus 23 degrees as a threshold for the low temperature? Because 23 degrees is not extremely cold temperature. It does not result in termination.
It's not very good.
It doesn't result in termination of working day. 35 or 40 degrees, the temperature went.
I come from India, I can't imagine, so I was convinced by her minus 23.
Cold temperature also can have positive channels. So, like GRTP and GRP, for example, because in cold weather there is an increase in demand for some goods and services. Production of energy grows, so maybe this, for some robustness checks, it is useful to apply thresholds and see the
Yeah, I will respond to some of the questions. First, on the last one, minus 23, it's basically the temperature, the low temperature that's experienced by all the regions of Russia. And what this was also our decisive decisive point in the methodology, because we needed to have the data available for all regions. And the same is actually true for the hotter temperatures. Plus 25 may be not that hot, but it is indeed experienced by all the regions of Russia. That's why we use this threshold. But in fact, we also plan to play a bit around these thresholds and see how the results are robust to the different definitions of extremes. There was one question about why agricultural profits could grow in the richer countries. This may specifically be because richer countries do not yet have that much of hot. So with the global warming, there will be more warmer temperatures. So in principle, agriculture will be benefiting because more cultivation of some products would be now available, which was not available before. So that could be this channel. Yeah, I totally agree on some points. This A1 figure, we tried to excluding these outliers, it's still the negative correlation is still there, but this was basically this small illustrative figure, maybe it will not even stay in the final version of the paper. And regarding the prices, we didn't yet look into this directly, but indirectly we look into the total monetary income. Real monetary income by the population. And we see that this is also decreasing. So indirectly, this shows that since the wages are not changing, this is probably monetary income falls because of the changing prices. But this is only indirect result that we have so far, and we do plan to look into this in more detail. Yeah, I think briefly I answered this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There are no questions. Thank you, our panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you for the
Please read. Why should the wages reduce? Wages should reduce if your
To me,
unemployment is increasing.
to me, it's because of the falling labor productivity. If it is extremely hot, you are not able
You
to
see,
work in the.
if people are
Yeah,
moving
but
from
I-
employment to unemployment, then the labor supply would reduce, but not the labor demand.
But yeah, I see the point. It just I wanted to hypothesize possible.
Well, you are saying, but what you are saying is I agree that because of hot temperature, labor productivity will